all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and my boy David bring two movies together, trying to find the perfect movie marathon, the perfect way to kill a weekend, the perfect double feature. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I've been hearing some weird codes being read to me through radio transmissions. I've been feeling kind of weird after hearing them, but it's all working out. I'm feeling pretty good.
Lucille Ball? Is that you?
I wish I was as rich as Lucille Ball. No, Dean, I've just been feeling a little bit of that, that red fever. We've gotten some Russian action going, and I'm kind of here for it. These are really good movies this week.
Yes, they are. And for everyone out there, this is going to be our last week of our foreign film month, where we've traveled across the globe. We've looked at Mexico, we've looked at Italy, we've looked at France, we've looked at Japan, and now we're at basically the titan of film of the golden age that basically did art house films before art house films were a thing, is Russia. And we're going to be looking at two Russian films that I really, really, really enjoyed when I saw them the first time, and I really hope David enjoyed them as well. But David, why don't we talk about, let's tell people what the movies are going to be, and then we'll talk about Russian filmmaking. So why don't you get started?
Yeah, the two movies we watched this week are The Cranes Are Flying, 1957, I believe, yes, directed by Mikhail Kalatozov. Say that 5 times fast. Paired with it, we have Ballad of a Soldier from 1959, directed by Grigory
Chukre,
whatever the hell. I don't know.
Neither of us speak Russian.
Neither of us speak Russian. It's impossible to learn that language. Infinitely complicated. But you know what? They speak it like it's a well-oiled machine. It was kind of almost... there's a music to it. Because obviously both these movies this week are in Russian proper, and we had to read subtitles again, as we've had to do frequently throughout Foreign Movie Month.
This is true. And yeah, so David, what is your opinion on like Russian cinema? Like as a whole, right? Because these movies were made way before like the Iron Curtain fell.
Yeah, technically this is in the throes of the Cold War. We're in the 50s. It's probably a little bit before it really heats up in the 60s, but we're in some healthy competition here, and I gotta confess, I don't know a whole lot about the Russian film industry or its history. You could probably say that one of the only movies I really knew was from Russia or from a Slavic region, because I don't even know if it's actually Russian, though I think it is. Well, I'll amend that. I think there's two. I obviously know Man with a Movie Camera is Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And then Battleship Potemkin. And that's about it. That's all I really know.
Which I think is a huge disservice to like Russian film, right? Because, yeah, I get it. Battleship Potemkin is the movie where it's like, guys, montage, right? Like montage, like changed cinema. And Man with a Movie Camera is like, guys, like other montage this is the art house montage flick, and it changed cinema. And those are like the only two movies like most film schools will make you watch about Russian cinema, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was only one other movie that was Russian or some sort of European, if I'm wrong, but you'll remember this. Goldstein used to talk a whole lot about this movie that took place in like a Russian submarine.
Das Boot.
Yeah, that's
I think
German,
that's German,
I guess.
though.
Yeah. So that goes to my point is I think I know more Russian, but yeah, I don't know a whole lot. I know that there were. I at least know that around the same time that a lot of other filmmakers in foreign countries were making really great movies, that the Russians were also making great movies. And maybe this is just a testament to, how much the Cold War really affected the cultural divide. Because when I watched, especially The Cranes Are Flying, but also in the Ballad of a Soldier, I felt like it was familiar in certain ways to a lot of your general European or even American life, but
Mhm.
for some reason that it just felt foreign. I will say, and we'll probably praise it a lot throughout the episode, The Cranes Are Flying was infinitely, a much more real and fluid and believable movie than I ever thought it would be, and I ever thought could come from that time period. Because I like all the people in that movie are just like full of life.
Oh yeah, everybody in the film for The Cranes Are Flying feel so grounded, so real, which is kind of strange because you don't really think of that kind of character in film until like, you know, the French New Wave or the neo-realist movement in Italy, which I think is going on around this time. And the other crazy thing is this is kind of these are kind of the first movies really get coming out for the Russian thaw, which is after like Stalin died. I think Stalin died in 53 or 55. Like he
Something
died
like
and
that.
then we kind of like lost that cult of personality around him, and then basically all the propaganda stuff and the really pushing down on like the arts in Russia kind of got softened up a little bit. So this is kind of the first time we get to see, Russian art uninhibited by like the state in like a long fucking time.
Yeah, which is weird because I would have thought that, and again, this is, I think, a testament to American propaganda. I thought in the middle of the 50s, we were kind of in the middle of a huge thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we were, it just wasn't, no one was like shooting each other. It was like people were spying and doing nasty shit via other things. From like my
yeah,
understanding of American propaganda of the Cold War.
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's like both these movies take place during World War II, if I'm correct. I mean,
Hmm.
it seems heavily implied that's what's going on. So we're
Yeah.
kind of seeing what's also interesting. We're seeing like versions of Russia that aren't contemporary to 1950, but are contemporary to a time when we were supposed to be on their side, but it also feels a little communist, but not like bad communist. But it also could be because of cities, and I don't know. It's kind of weird. It was just weird just for me because let me put it this way: the Cranes Are Flying. All the characters in the film felt like they could have been actors from like today. Like that's
Hmm.
how well they did their job,
Yeah.
as opposed to like actors from 1950. Like even in the French New Wave films, I'm like that feels like an acting job from the 1950s. Whereas like I don't know, man. And then two, it's like the urban setting in The Cranes Are Flying, as well as even like the settings in Ballads of a Soldier. Like Cranes Are Flying felt like it could have taken place in Brooklyn or something, like in New York, just like a general urban setting anywhere in the U.S.
Hmm.
So I don't know. It was fascinating. It was very enjoyable. Um, I don't know. I'm really excited to talk about these.
It's same here. And I think I'll stop pussyfooting around and we'll just jump into the movies because,
Whoa.
yeah, because honestly, we can go on with the whole thing of like, Russian history, blah, blah, blah. These movies came out in a weird time and they both just blew up once they got released to the rest of the world. But honestly, let's just talk about the movies. That's
Yeah,
what we're here for.
we'll get into it. I guess real
Where do you want
quick,
to?
let's dig into those log lines and then we'll get this thing going.
What's the elevator pitches for this week?
The Cranes Are Flying is about a wanting lover that keeps the flame of hope burning after her fiancé is drafted into the war, passing every day by waiting for word that he is still alive. Ballad of a Soldier is about a young soldier that travels home after being given leave for a heroic deed on the battlefield, but is struck with love at first sight in a country that aches through war.
These two center around love, war, and the really, really sad parts about both of those.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that it's interesting that both these movies kind of deal with problems with free will. I certainly noticed that a little bit, because the love is maybe a little bit part of that. But neither of the main characters in this movie and their counterparts are really able to express this kind of like freedom of behavior, which I'm not saying that as like a uniquely, anti-Russian thing. I'm saying that more as I noticed a lot that during wartime, it just seems more appropriate for people to be in a place when they're supposed to be, because it's their order or duty or whatever, which is kind of it's present in American war movies, but I think in this, the Russians take a little bit more issue with that.
Interesting. So, where do you want to start? Because I know you want to gush over Cranes Are Flying, and I think Ballad of a Soldier has some good merits to it. But where do we want to go first?
Let's dig right into Cranes Are Flying, because what a fantastic movie. I mean, come on, man. And
you got to talk about.
I did watch it first too, so
I understand. I watched it second for me, so that might have changed my opinions of Ballad of a Soldier versus Cranes, so that might have helped. But also, for those coming into this, The Cranes Are Flying is a favorite film of both Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese. There's merit to this film. Well, because the movie gods have spoken about it. But yeah, David, like this movie, oh my god. The camera work in it is amazing. I think it's one of the earliest films I've ever seen that used handheld extensively.
And very fluidly.
Yeah, and there's that one shot where to this day I have no idea how it's done, and it's awesome. And like you already went on to the point, the actors in this film are fantastic. They don't feel like the stage performers that worked in film, like the 30s and 40s. There's none of that hokey cheesiness. Everybody feels really organic. And yeah, and what can I say? I'm a sucker for a good love story, which this becomes a very depressing love story, but whatever. It happens. But where do you want to start? Where do you want to get going on this journey?
Well, I think that above all else, there's two things going on in this movie. Kind of the perfect main actress, and then good direction behind that. Because, everybody around her does a really good job, but the movie really comes to life when our main actress who plays Veronica...
Tatiana Samalovya.
Right, and she is the whole movie in its of itself. It's cut and dry. And I say that, and it's like there's leading ladies in a lot of movies from this era and throughout history, but none of them they're all stereotypical, silver screen women, is I guess how I would put it. And there's a very American way to put that. But this woman, I think, actually puts us in the shoes of a specific person rather than a generalized character. And I like that. Is that everything about this, it feels like I'm watching Veronica's specific situation. Because, this is kind of also something that happens in some of those shots where they're in crowds and things. But you can see that this is going on around everybody else. Everybody else is experiencing the problem of having their lover go off to war. But why do we care about Veronica specifically? And I think those little idiosyncrasies that she puts into her performance really help that.
Oh, yeah. Like, there's certain things about this that is so fascinating. How she just acts, right? Like how she's just there in like quiet moments. She plays with her hair in weird ways. How she interacts with Boris is fascinating. Like her interaction with Boris feels more like a real couple than I've seen in any other film of like the 1950s or 60s for that matter. Right? Like
or most of
they
the rest of the 20th century, really.
yeah, cuz they feel like a real couple. They don't feel like a movie couple. Where I think people know what a movie couple is, right? You know, they everything
Yeah,
seems overly idealized
they're
kind of
not
thing.
like Sandra Bullock and Bradley Cooper. You know what I mean? They're not
Yeah.
just two stars put plunked in the movie. This feels like a working class couple who's excited about getting married.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, like one of my favorite scenes is kind of right before Boris gets the orders to go off to war, and he's like boarding up one of the windows because the war has started, and it's pretty much okay. Now, what's the next order? And they're kind of dance around each other metaphorically. I mean, of just like how they play with each other, as well as how Boris is like in it but not in it. It almost felt it almost gets to the point where I'm like I can see it really and can really understand that relationship dynamic of like I think she's a little bit more into the relationship than he is, but the reality is that the reality to her is that Boris is an equal partner in all of this, which we'll soon find out is not true.
You know, and we also get an immediate introduction of like conflict in the relationship with Mark, who's again, I'm really bad at this. I can never remember if he is fucking if he's Boris's brother or cousin. I can never remember. But Mark, who who comes in and he wants to be with Veronica, but he
Yeah.
knows he can't because Boris is there, and Veronica doesn't really want anything to do with him.
Yeah, this is a kind of another interesting bit about the movie. I think it's his brother. I think that's true. Although I do remember something about a cousin, but that's not the point. Um, I guess it's like there's a clear difference here, and this is a lesson to take away for anybody looking to build some character out of their character web. Boris is he's a working class guy, but he is who he is because he's a working class guy. There's no artifice to Boris.
Yeah. Like his biggest aspiration is he wants to be an engineer and he's doing like blueprints and stuff like that, but that's basically it. He wants to just instead of being working class in a factory, he wants to be working class owning the factory, and that's his whole desire there.
Right. And two, it's like the pretentiousness that comes out of Mark is just it makes you
Oh
want to
my god.
throw up. And it's I think the director does a very good job at getting us to hate him just as much as Veronica does. Because like and there was a scene we talked about kind of before the show that really shows this. Mark's very forceful with trying to get the relationship going. It's very. It almost reminds me of a sort of Beauty and the Beast is probably a bad way to put it because it's not necessarily about that, but it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like Veronica's Belle. There's the Beast that she's falling in love with, but then there's Gaston that's playing piano and trying to show her that he's worth loving, and
Actually,
it's like
that's kind of a good analogy when you think about it because like between like Boris, he's a good guy, but he's, working class, kind of scruffy. He's not exactly, you know, the hunk,
but he's
but
Boris.
he's Boris. He's Boris. Veronica loves Boris. Veronica, very beautiful woman, very smart, funny, all this other stuff. And then there's Mark, who honestly sounds like a catch on paper. Good looking. He's an accomplished musician. He works he works at like a music school or conservatory. He's like a composer or something. He's generally well off. He sounds like a catch, but Veronica doesn't love Mark. She loves Boris. And Mark kind of is like, well, Boris is going to war and I'm not, so why not we be together? And that leads to some very interesting things in the movie.
Yeah, because this is kind of another interesting bit here that kind of happens later on. Because there's Boris and Mark's dad. He's I believe, a surgeon at a
Hmm.
hospital. Um, but he's an upstanding man, and he takes clear exception to what Mark is doing to Boris and their family, because the family takes it very badly when later in the movie Veronica and Mark decide to marry.
For those not watching, there's air quotes in that. By
Yeah.
decide to get married, Mork. Okay, is this where we put the trigger warning here? Because I think we have to talk about it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's forced and is extreme. To me, I tell them how you read into it, because maybe it's just I didn't pick up on something at the time, and you know,
Oh,
because the scene takes place at the same time of a bombing, so I was like, oh, is this just like supposed to be metaphorical or something, or
yeah. So I if I remember correctly, Veronica is at like Mark's apartment and Mark is like basically confessing his love to her and she like rejects him. She wants Boris. And then Mark kind of refuses to let her leave and okay, we never see anything. Like there's no like no one's naked, but it's heavily implied that Mark rapes Veronica, like forces himself on her, and that's kind of what like breaks her, like break not like breaks her in terms of like okay I'll marry you, but like breaks her down. Like Boris is gone, her family is dead, she's completely alone, and Mark has basically made his claim for her, and like she at this point she knows there's no way out.
mm,
Basically she wants to stay close to Boris's family, but after this she's like the only way I can keep like this going is by basically giving in to Mark, and Mark forcing himself on her is like a very like visual representation of how he's kind of like won this thing, and it's really fucked up. And it's taking place during a bombing, which is why it's intercut with like the city crumbling and all this other stuff. So it's done in a very artistic way, but I read it as Mark's forcing himself on Veronica in that scene.
yeah, I think I was reading into it with a little bit more of like the subtext of like it's the violent truth rearing its ugly head
Mm-hmm.
of during war there's no time for love, there's only time for survival, and even when that means like faking a relationship in order to gain safety. um, yeah, I don't know, I mean, it's certainly it certainly gets you to hate the guy, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
It's a very compelling moment, and uh, it's kind of interesting because like the first half of the movie is really good in that I feel like there's a clear separation between the first and second half of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
with this scene kind of being the halfway point. But it's not that I don't think one is better than the other. It's just that there's something kind of that feels different about both. Um, I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's this kind of interesting thing where, as this develops, basically Veronica is able to move in with Boris's family, um, and this kind of creates an interesting dynamic. I think she takes a volunteer nurse job at the hospital because in order to earn her keep or something
Yeah,
like this.
she becomes a wartime nurse at the hospital that Boris's dad works at, Fyodor, and she uses it as a way to earn her keep and all this other things, and also she looks at it as like if Boris comes through here, I'll be able to find him.
Yeah, but of course
Cause
it's kind of hard to find him when.
yeah, we have this scene that's in. Is it in the first act or is it after? Is it before or after Mark and Veronica get married? I think it's after, right?
It's a good question. I can't quite remember, but I know it's around the midpoint of the movie.
Yeah, we have this scene where Boris and his friend Stefan are basically being held down under enemy fire. And Stefan's injured, and Boris carries him through like the mud and the trenches and things like that, and Boris gets shot. And we have this beautiful scene where it's Boris is like he's like falling and spiraling, and we see the tree spiraling ahead of him, and it morphs into basically Boris returning home and finding Veronica, and they're getting married, and he's so happy. It's basically not his life flashing before his eyes, but his ultimate dream flashing before his eyes, and he collapsed into the mud. And we don't see him die. He's still alive at the scene ends. Right? He's saying he says something, and then they pick him up and they're taking him off to see the medic, and then the scene cuts and we don't see him again.
Yeah, really well crafted. And I think, there's a similar level of cliche and creativity as we saw last week with A Fistful of Dollars.
That was a couple weeks ago, but yeah.
Or was it a couple weeks ago? Yeah, whenever it was. In the final scene of that movie, we get this interesting POV in which the bad guy has been shot and he's like reeling, and we had a conversation where basically it was like, it's a great shot when you see it used in its original form, but it's so cliche nowadays, and I'm like, wow, it sucks how I recognize this and I can't just get the full value of what's going on here. There was almost something similar in that the only exception I'll take is there's a great emotional value to it. The shot in which he's looking up at the sun and it's drifting away as like the lens zooms out, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. What a perfect way to describe what's going on there.
And it's done with no dialogue. It's just music. It's just music, and that's it. And it's beautiful. Like, how that sequence is composed and performed is wonderful. And so Boris gets injured. We don't see what happens to him. Veronica, devastated, is trying to find her place in wartime Russia and tries to survive. And through that, oh my God, Veronica goes through the ringer in terms of like how judgmental people are, how hard life is for like the Russian people at this point, how she just has to take responsibility for so many things in her life, and it's so difficult. And also the fact that Mark is a total like scumbag.
Absolute. I really like this scene that takes place at like whatever the bar or coffee shop he plays piano at, like a stupid asshole.
Yes, that one.
And there's a present, I think, that Boris left Veronica, if I'm correct.
Yes, this is one of those wonderful things I loved about this movie that I think people use nowadays but don't use it as well. And it's the combination of like the symbolic prop and the ticking time bomb. Because at the beginning of the movie, I think it's like the first 10-15 minutes in, it's Veronica's birthday. Boris gets her a pet squirrel because he calls her his squirrel, his little squirrel, because, it's cute. And he hides a love note inside the squirrel's little basket with all the acorns in it. And Veronica gets it and she cherishes it because it's the last thing Boris gave to her before he went off to war. But she never finds the note. She never sees it. And it's one of those things where we see it with her wherever she goes. She has it, next to her bedside when she travels to a new place. She always makes sure to pack it. It's the totem. It's her, like, as long as she has the squirrel, then Boris is still alive to her. Like, Boris will come back. And we have this point in the movie where Mark, he's going to go off to this cabaret thing and he's going to give basically his mistress a gift, and he takes the squirrel and he's going to go give it to her, and Veronica gets back and she's so mad. She goes to the bar, and that's when we finally find the note. And the payoff there, oh, it's heartbreaking. Oh my God.
Yeah, and I think this is in my opinion to a similar level that, like, when we watch The Apartment and there's the moment with the broken mirror.
Yes.
It's like that. It's like that's the emotional payoff we're getting in this scene. I love it. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's great up and down. I guess there's one final moment that I really enjoy in this movie when Veronica's building is bombed. That's
Yes,
really
yes.
good. That's really good because
Oh yeah.
part of it, I'm also like, where did they find like, did they bomb a whole building in order to set this scene up? But I guess you could dress it, just find a building and dress it similarly.
How it's shot is wonderful. Oh my god. This director knows how to film people running upstairs. If you're filming a sequence where somebody's running upstairs, study this movie.
Oh yeah, and then it's just like the perfection of like, first of all, the fact that the actress is literally running through live flame
Yeah.
with a camera guy who's running through live flame. If you really think about it,
And it's not a stunt double. That's actually Tatiana Samolev. She's actually doing this. And, like, that's amazing.
oh yeah,
And they're all these long takes that they never cut. It's beautiful.
they never cut. They the clock being there is interesting to me. There's a little bit of a visual signifier there. I really like this moment when the fireman or soldier or whatever runs up into the building after her to be like, "What's wrong with you?" But then I like that because that's such a cliche moment. But then there's at least like him pulling back and be like, "Oh, I realize what has happened here. I'm sorry. Let's get you out of here," kind of thing. I don't know. I think that's one of my favorite parts about this movie is that whenever there is a cliche set to happen, like it brings it back around to remind everybody why those behaviors are things we want to pay attention to. Um, I don't know.
It keeps the human quality of these cliches. And it's like, yeah, they're cliches, but here's the human element of these.
Yeah.
That's the thing about this movie. It feels so human.
Mm. Very fluid. I mean, I'd love to actually know because you mentioned it earlier, real quick. What did the movie gods say about this movie? I'd love to know their opinions if you've heard any.
So the opinions that I've garnered is that the movie gods that we talk about is Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, who, if you don't know what's wrong with you, they made The Godfather and Goodfellas, please. So what I have garnered is that Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese love this movie. They put it in their their top 15 films of all time. And it comes back to, the performances from Tatiana is fantastic. And this is one of those movies where it felt so ahead of its time that it was like this was the kind of movie these guys wanted to make before they knew what the movies they wanted to make were. And I think that's a true statement, right? Because this movie, like, let's be honest, this movie's like, what, over 60 years old? And it still feels so modern. It feels like this could be made now. And it would probably still hit.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, we'll get to that question. Obviously, it's in the show. I know that you like to bring up these as kind of like the bow on top. But yeah, I think that is a good way to put it. And a pretty good segue into our next film on the final stamp of the passport. We're going to be talking about Ballad of Soldier right after the break, which is happening right after
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this. We'll go with this.
Yeah. Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. What he said. To part 2 of our double feature, where we get to talk about the Ballad of a Soldier from 1959, the first Teen Choice Award winner at the Cannes Film Festival. And yeah, it's gonna be cool. So David, how do you like this movie?
I think it was good. We were kind of having a short discussion during the break that, I like both of these movies a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I clearly prefer The Cranes Are Flying, but this is also a really good movie. I think there's a really good opportunity to get into the perspective of a young person with this, and kind of an interesting. I'd hate to liken it to a comedy, but I'm only doing so because of the character dynamic. It reminds me of what? Not Bringing Up Baby, but there's the one where the guy has to go out and get the rich girl and bring her home.
It Happened One Night?
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of that type of relationship, only with the backdrop of a violent, scary war.
Well, I mean, bro, this is a road movie, and you love road movies.
Yeah, I don't know what the obsession is with road movies, that everything lately has just been... Dean and I have been doing some creative stuff on the side, and we've been kind of with a majority of the ideas coming up with road movies. But I do think that this is a good example of that, in that there's a reason that the road movie is happening and needs to happen. There's legitimate traveling that needs to be done, but B, also kind of a metaphoric need for these young people to see the state of the country.
Yeah. You know what I find interesting about this movie in particular? So this came out in 1959. That The Cranes Are Flying leans more into the sad state the war was, and Ballad of a Soldier almost has a strangely optimistic view of the war. Obviously not war is good, but the people in the wartime weren't all destroyed, right? Alyosha, our main character, he seems way more far more chipper and happy than Veronica
Definitely.
Is our other lead character in The Cranes Are Flying. And we have Shura, who is the female lead in this film, who again seems like she's scared, she doesn't want to get caught hitching a ride on a train halfway across Russia.
Yeah.
But it's one of these movies where it's it's a sweet movie. It leans into that melodrama, sweetness going on, and we don't really get a really sad, depressing beat in the film on the level of Cranes Are Flying until way at the end.
Yeah, I think that is the clear difference. There is a much more storybook feel to this, or maybe I think the right word is naivete, that because both of these guys are probably 17, 18, 19 at most. I don't know if their ages, I don't think their age is specifically said in the movie, but they're young
Alyosha is 19.
Yeah.
I think that's stated in the movie, and Shura, I'm sure, is probably about that age, 17, 18, 19, something like that.
Right. So, my assumption is that that's kind of what we're getting, is that they are young people who have been fed a version of the country that is violently different from what they're experiencing. And it's not necessarily, there's not a cynicism in that the country isn't in the state it is by its own fault. It's World War II, so this is because of a legitimate hardship that was going on, and then everybody having to kind of suffer through that as like the responsibility of war.
Mm-hmm.
But this movie, just as the last movie did, and I think they're a great pairing because of it, deals just as heavily in the sort of, there's a lot about regular life we have to put aside that we will never reconcile with. Like the obvious main thing in Cranes Are Flying is true love. Same here, except for that relationship kind of develops over the movie, because I think that the most striking thing to me is that both these young people haven't been able to form that type of relationship with another person their own age yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, because the war started. They were from totally different ends of the country. The war started, and then their formative years of kind of like figuring out life is just not there anymore. It goes from like, oh, I'm going to go off to school. I'm going to, hang out with my friends. I'm going to like fall in love, get married. I'm going to grow as a person. It's just like, no, war happens. Your 20s don't exist anymore. And they make a statement at the beginning of the movie that I think they spoil that Alyosha is like dies, and this is his story of the war, kind of thing. And we have no idea the fate of Shura. We have no idea what happens to her. We just and it's so weird because I'm watching the movie and I just want these two to be together. And again, I'm a sucker for a good love story, and it's so cute. It's so like nice. This is like a perfect kind of like teen romance that doesn't feel like sleazy to watch, and it doesn't feel lame and contrived to see develop. Right? Is that just me?
No, there, like I said, it's kind of that innocent naivete that's going on, and that's all it is. It's just pure. And I think that's what is being contrasted by some of the images we get throughout the movie, especially that the very first time they meet, Shura is like afraid that Alyosha is gonna do exactly what Mark did to Veronica or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. She's like terrified of this guy that she's locked in a cart with.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, the movie is it's very cut and dry. I'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. I think there was a lot less to figure out in this one as opposed to The Cranes Are Flying. How would I put it?
It's a very obvious, this is a anti-war film that is very big on, these kids who were so young, who had so much life ahead of them, had to cut short because of war.
Yeah, and I think it's a good message, but I think that's the clear difference, is that by the end of the movie, I'm left being like, I've watched that once. I'll probably never really go back and watch it. I'll never go to seek it out to watch it again, because it's good, but it's still pretty simple what happens. I mean, boys on leave, boy meets girl while they're both hitching a ride on a train. They travel through the country. They get separated, which is probably, I think that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, just because of how it's shot and like the meaning behind it, especially with, like you said, that it's pretty heavily implied that Alyosha does not survive the war. I think, well, yeah, I guess really for me, the half of the movie that I'm most fascinated with is that final train station sequence on. Like, that's really where I liked it.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's one of those things where we see Alyosha develop this whole time, his relation with Shura. We see what he had to go through to get to this point. And that final train station sequence where he's yelling to Shura, being like, write to me, please stay in contact. Please something. And she can't hear him over the sound of the train, and she just runs after him and waves goodbye. And Alyosha has that realization that Shura was in love with him and that he was in love with her on that sad train ride back to see his mother. And oh my god, it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah,
fuck these Russians.
Because it's especially one of those things where you're sitting there like, if he would have gotten off the train, which, yeah, I mean, means deserting the army, uh, he probably might be still alive, and that, Hope would still be alive. But yeah, it does kind of feel like I don't know, maybe it's that it's just I think these movies are both so similar by the end of them that I'm like, I don't know if I could say something different about this one. You know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting, right? So, because the movies, they have kind of that similar ending where, oh, even though the war was hard and rough, we must never forget those who fell because these are their stories, kind of thing. That's basically the ending sequence of each of them, right?
Yeah.
One of them takes place at a train station, and I think the interesting thing about this movie is that bittersweetness at the end with Alyosha and his mother, Katerina, where Alyosha travels literally across the country. I think it takes him they gave him 6 days to travel, and he loses days because of, getting stuck on the train, getting, having to hitchhike, all these things. Having to go back for Shura in one case, and he ends up getting there, and he was going to plan to stay for a day or two and just be with his family, bring his mother some sort of hope that, hey, I'm still alive, I love you. And he's only able to come back long enough to hug her and say goodbye. And then he has to go right back to war because he's lost so much time.
Yeah.
And David, isn't that so okay, I got a question for you about the end of that movie, that moment. Does it hurt more knowing that he made this entire journey only to say goodbye, Mom, and hug her for a minute and then go right back to war? Or do you think she would have been better off if he never came back? To never give her that hope.
It does. It certainly, I think, is supposed to leave you with that interpretation and kind of this. It's like a food for thought moment. Which, if a movie did that today, good luck. But and I say that with a grain of salt because it's like if a movie did it this simply today, where it's just it's kind of a simple moment.
Well, people would bitch and moan the whole thing, being like, just desert the army, fuck them, man. Go back, find Shora, get married, have babies. Come on.
Yeah.
Army won't find you.
I think it certainly is a question of the time. I almost feel like that's just what the director's trying to do. It's just leave you with the question. It's like, well, would he have, if he had never come home, would he have even died? Would he have survived even as long if he had stayed in? Would he, there's all those questions of it's the what if question, what if? And then it's kind of one of these things where, like I said, if this was done today in a war movie, yeah, like you said, people would not take it well. Particularly because he's fighting World War II here, whereas nowadays it's geopolitics and all that crap. It's it's all up in the air. But I think that these kinds of endings have a lot of merit when done correctly, and this is one I think is done correctly. One of my favorite examples of that type of ending, where it's just kind of left up in the air what happens, is the end of Ex Machina, when the robot's just in the crowd and then disappears, and it's like, well, what happens next? It's like, well, that is what happens next. The lines become blurred. And it's almost like exactly what's going on here is the lines are blurred as far as whatever the right choice to make was. So I don't know.
These are very interesting movies in terms of food for thought moments.
Yeah.
Man, if they only did this one thing a little differently, how would this story have spiraled in a whole different tangent?
And I think that's kind of the clear difference in maybe why I like Cranes Are Flying more. Ballad of a Soldier is that interpretive ending that, really, when you think about it, it's is that really needed? Or, the Cranes Are Flying, opposite of that, is no, it's clear that bad things were going to happen the minute we got into war. So the question is more how do we mourn that version of life that we we thought we were fighting for, but even by fighting for it, are never going to get back. And I
It's
think
kind.
that's kind of the point, because that's the moment at the beginning and the end of the movie, and cranes are flying, is the cranes are flying, let's enjoy this moment, and then that becomes a memory that you have to keep alive in order to feel like there's any reason left to live after war.
It's also fascinating because of the perspectives we're going on here, right? Because the cranes are flying is of the eyes of a civilian, and their journey through through the beginning to the end of the war, and their heartache, aching for their love to come back, and finding out they're never coming back. They were
Yeah.
lost in the war, and how she has to survive that. And Ballad of a Soldier is the perspective of, well, a soldier, and over the course of a couple of days, and this is the soldier that we lost during the war. He had all this ahead of him. He had a family, he had a mother who loved him, he found a girl who loved him, and he will never explore anything after the credits roll, because he doesn't go on after this. It's over. He's the life we lost in the war. And it's fascinating. These movies are so fascinating as to how they look back on the war, and how it affected their country, how it affected Russia and their people. And it's one of those things where I feel those messaging and those themes are so universal that it makes sense these movies work across, this vastness of time and this vastness of cultural barrier.
Yeah, because it's kind of the same thing we got out of stories like All Quiet on the Western Front. You could say Cold Mountain was a similar movie. You could say Saving Private Ryan kind of has some of that. Yeah, I think that is true, that there is some universal merit to these stories, these films, and especially, in my opinion, anti-war films. Like, that's kind of one of the central considerations, is like, life will never be the same after all this happens, and you just gotta enjoy it while it lasts. But in a way, maybe that's a larger lesson about life: is you do need to enjoy it while it lasts. Some food for thought.
And with that food for thought, I think that brings us into our little wrap-up section here. Now, David, let's put on our pretentious caps, because I got a question for you. Because it's not like we haven't been pretentious throughout this, but whatever. I got one for you. So I asked you in the beginning with The Cranes Are Flying that we felt like that movie could, is so universal that it transcends time. Like, the themes are so good. And we even said that about Ballad of a Soldier. We had that little wrap-up moment a second ago where these movies work across, time and cultural barrier, and they feel just universal in the stories they're telling.
Yeah.
But here's my question for you. Should these have been our World War II movie picks? I don't think we could get any more dig into more themes, because these movies are fascinating. I just want people to watch them. But
yeah,
these have been better World War II picks.
I guess it'd be one of those things where it would be a good pairing for World War II movies. It's never really explicitly stated it's World War II. It's just kind of implied through the fashion and culture of the time. I think the most we get is there's Tommy guns that the Russians are using, which were of Russian invention, I believe.
Well, they're just Tommy gun look-alike kind of things.
Yeah.
How Americans look at Tommy guns, they look very similar to what the Russian PSSR looked like. There's my old school Call of Duty history coming in. What's up?
Yeah, exactly. World at War for the win. So yeah, I think that this would have been a good pairing for that. I think it was a very good pairing for a Russian film, because it was kind of like when we've gone through and looked at Italian spaghetti westerns, French New Wave, kind of 50s Japanese, which wasn't really a wave, but it was kind of a golden age in Japanese filmmaking.
It was the introduction of Kurosawa and Ozu and those guys, right?
And I just think that it's a good snapshot of a moment that really marks some of the great achievements of Russian filmmaking, and then these two movies are good representatives of that.
Then I guess here we go. Like the foreign film month. Do you think we hit a good array of films across the border, and what have we learned from our excursion into all these different cultures, different ways of telling stories, different films? What have we learned from this experience?
Well, one of them is certainly one we've already touched on this episode, and that a lot of stories are universal. That was kind of refreshing to go through and see that, there's this kind of talk nowadays too, if you're a filmmaker coming up in quote unquote the industry, whatever that means. There's a lot of this talk about like your films need to be able to play internationally in order to make money, which I don't totally buy into. I just think that it's not a good business model to expect a film to make 10 times its budget every time. Sometimes you need to just be prepared to make the money back, or maybe 1 times the amount. And
you need to expect to make enough to pay off the film and have a little extra to pay the backers.
Yeah, and there's often those rules that go along with what will play internationally, like action and I think horror are sometimes what are most popular because those are most understandable, whereas comedy doesn't always play. But it's one of those things where it's just like, I just feel like if you do a story correctly, it will play no matter what, because some things are just behavioral and universal as a result, like we see in these movies. Both these movies could just as easily take place in the U.S. They might have a slightly different backdrop, but I totally think Cranes Are Flying could take place in the middle of Brooklyn, or maybe Los Angeles, and I totally feel like Ballad of a Soldier could be a trek across the Midwest. If you know what I mean. It's like, and it'd be about a guy from Kansas. It's just a matter of the fact that, or even if we want to touch on the other films we've seen this month, Y Tu Mama Tambien could be about a road trip from like Los Angeles to Vegas or something, and then,
it could even be something as simple as like we're going from like, the Inland Empire, and we're driving out to the beach or something. We're driving out to like Cabo San Lucas or something like that.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of movies we watched this month that are like that, and then some of them, have their specific cultural things. Like Hiroshima Mon Amour probably is a little bit more French than some movies need to be, but it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, I think you just have to take the merits of the fact that just because there's a border maybe doesn't necessarily mean that it's a whole different world that is alien. And if you can read subtitles, which has certainly been a majority of this month, then you'll
just
be fine.
A little. And if you don't want to read subtitles, like Fistful of Dollar and Django were awesome, and they're westerns. They're great.
Yeah,
they're just very Italian.
Fistful of Dollars was, pretty much in English. It wasn't like a dub, whereas Django, I know, was originally in Italian and then was dubbed English.
Yeah.
But even then, it's like, that's kind of the point. And also kind of the Italian thing, the Italian week there is a good example of how, these people want cross-cultural films. It's just that they don't see it as that way. If that's a way I could put it, they kind of just, the Italians like cowboy films, and they're like, let's make some cowboy films. Not the Italians got cowboy films and they're like, let's make American movies about cowboys. No, that's not what's going on at all. They just liked what they saw and they made it themselves. Which I think, that's what needs to happen. Is just, if you want your films to play with more than just English speaking or American audiences, just make it good. Like, it'll play.
And that would be my recommendation to everybody out there who's listening, is you can watch films that aren't in English and are in black and white, and they're going to be good. I think every film we saw this month, I would be more than happy to recommend. And these two specifically, we saved the best for last. I would wholeheartedly recommend you go out and see both of these movies.
Yeah, I would say so.
But David, if you can only watch one, what would you watch, and why is it The Cranes Are Flying?
The Cranes Are Flying because, like I said, the Ballad of a Soldier, of all else that it doesn't have as opposed to The Cranes Are Flying, is it still has that kind of stiff Los Angeles eyes acting and direction, whereas The Cranes Are Flying is just a breath of fresh air from that era, as far as how fluid and deep all of the characters feel. So I don't know. That's a movie where I would watch it again solely because I'm like fascinated with how well it's done.
Honestly, I would recommend Cranes Are Flying too. I've seen that movie 3 times now, and honestly, I want to see it infinitely more times. That movie's, out of the movies we've watched so far, I think we've only seen 3 or 4 movies I would call actual masterpieces, and this is one of them. But
yeah,
that's something for when we do our wrap up and tell everybody our opinions on everything. But David, that brings an end to Foreign Film Month and brings us into next month, which is going to be a whole thing. It'll be totally different. What is next month?
it is going to be very colorful, you could say. In June, we're going to be doing cartoons. Cartoon June, everybody. What we are so creative over here at the Double Feature. Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of fun watching a whole slew of different types of animated movies this month. We're going to be doing next week starting off the month with kind of a couple of our favorites, but favorite non-Disney animation films, because for some reason animation is almost synonymous with Walt Disney at this point.
It happens. He owns basically everything. He's been dead for like 40 years, and he still owns basically everything.
Yeah. What a fascinating economic time we live in. But for those favorites, I chose Cats Don't Dance,
which is one of the deepest cuts I've ever heard in my entire life.
Oh, but whenever I watch this movie, it like makes me fall in love with the idea of movies again, bro. It's like there's nothing like watching Cats Don't Dance whenever you catch it on cable. I mean, this is it. Literally, of all movies, like I know that's not really a thing anymore, where you don't really you're not really watching TV and then you happen to come across a movie. But if I'm ever in front of a television and just watching cable and this movie's on, I'll stop the presses. I'm sitting down to watch it for however long it's going on. I love this movie.
And for me, this is one that's probably not that big of a surprise. If you ever see my Instagram, it's literally my Instagram photo, and it's Iron Giant. Because oh my god, if you want a movie that's just gonna tap into like 8-year-old Dean's like childhood, it's the Iron Giant. I'm 26, 7, whatever years old, and when the Iron Giant says Superman at the end and closes his eyes, I still cry like a bitch. That movie gets me.
I think it's going to be a great month, starting it off again with another return actor, by the way. We are going to be getting Vin Diesel all over again.
My man, the philosopher of all time.
Yeah. And we got some really great things planned out for the rest of the month. This is, I think, going to be another, Foreign Film Month. I was kind of like, I don't know if it's going to like really catch our eye, but everything this month has really been enjoyable. And this is one of those months where I'm like, I know everything this month is going to be enjoyable. So it just makes me even more excited for it.
And honestly, I can't wait to jump in.
Yeah.
But if people wanted to jump in with us, David, where can they find us?
Well, until next week, you can subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts in order to keep up with this. If you're on Spotify or one of the other popular podcast platforms like Radio Public, Overcast, or whatever you're listening to this on, go ahead and subscribe so that you can keep up with what we do. You can also keep up with us on our YouTube channel, In the Frame. We post this podcast or other podcast, Too Obscure for TV, Dean's sister podcast to this podcast, which he does with his lovely girlfriend, the Film Club. They do one movie every week, in case you can't handle the 2 movies that we get into because we're big nerds.
It happens.
Just as well, you can keep up with us and everything we do by subscribing to us or following us rather on Instagram or TikTok. If you want to find us on Instagram, it's going to be dd_double feature podcast, whereas on TikTok we are just double feature podcast. Or I'm sorry, correction, it's dd_double feature picture show and double feature picture show, respectively.
One day we'll get it right on the first try.
Yeah,
but David,
one day.
I think that brings us to an end here.
Yeah.
And everybody, all I can say, hope to see you next time. Peace.
See ya.